Tristan stirred his unappetizing green tea in the mug, observing the tea bag as it floated up and down in the murky liquid. He took a sip, grimaced, and let out a grunt of distaste. Instead of being enjoyable, he thought it tasted like soggy grass, mixed with disappointment. With a heavy sigh, he exited the break room and stepped into the office hallway, pressing the elevator button with the same weary resignation he'd shown when pouring his third cup that morning. The reflective elevator doors showed a man who looked drained, his eyes tired, and his mouth set in a constant frown. He tried to ignore the strands of premature gray hair creeping over his ears. Taking another sip of his matcha, he forced himself to swallow, trying not to picture how much it resembled something he once scraped off his lawnmower's wheels. He sighed deeply as he checked his watch. After a morning filled with back-to-back meetings, he felt utterly unnecessary. Having only sat quietly, jotting down notes while higher-ups rambled on for an hour without saying anything of substance. Just a few more years, he reminded himself, for what felt like the millionth time. A few more years of proving your worth, then you'll get promoted to manager, then director, and finally, you'll have made it. He took another sip of the matcha and winced, caught between the urge to either force it down or spit it out. It was a moment later that he noticed an elderly man standing next to him, also waiting for the elevator. The old man glanced at Tristan and smiled. "Just switched to tea, huh?" Tristan reluctantly swallowed and nodded. Yeah," the old man chuckled. "That look on your face. Oof, you're definitely a coffee person, right?" Tristan scrutinized the old man's features. He appeared ancient, probably nearing 90. However, he wasn't a senior executive or part of the board. Tristan had memorized all their faces. Not really in the mood for small talk with a random stranger, he simply nodded. "Thought so," the old man continued casually. "Let me guess, it wasn't your idea." Tristan frowned at the tea in his hand and replied, "My girlfriend suggested it." "Ah, another young one just following orders," the old man chuckled once more. "It's unfortunate that you don't know how to think independently." Tristan felt a slight sting from the comment but didn't want to create a scene at work by confronting this guy. So, he forced himself to stay quiet and took another sip of his matcha. The old man glanced at him sideways, shaking his head in disappointment. "Nothing. What a shame. I expected you to have a bit more courage than that." Tristan turned to face the man, furrowing his brows as he clenched his fist tightly. "What's your issue?" Tristan shot back angrily. The old man chuckled. "Now that's more like it. I knew there was still some fire in you." He playfully poked Tristan in the chest and laughed again. Tristan grimaced and turned back toward the elevator, frustrated by how long it was taking. "You'll be waiting forever if you just stand there," the old man remarked. "Feel free to take the stairs," Tristan retorted sharply. "I'm not talking about the elevator, kid," the old man said, suddenly serious. "Your aspirations, your ambitions. I assume you have some. Let me tell you, no one ever gets anywhere by simply waiting around. You've got to seek it out yourself." "Yeah, well, no one has told me where else to look yet, so," Tristan replied, coldly. "And you're just sitting there waiting for someone to guide you, huh? Expecting the world to hand you everything you desire. That's the issue with your generation. You believe your dreams will magically come true without effort." Tristan let out a sharp breath, fed up with being lectured by an insignificant stranger. He opened his mouth, ready to express exactly what he thought of the old man. Then something was pressed against his chest, a crumpled piece of paper, aged with time. "Lucky for you, kid," the old man whispered conspiratorially. "That's precisely how your world operates today." What is this?" Tristan asked suspiciously, his anger quickly replaced by confusion. He cautiously peeled back a corner of the folded paper. To him, it looked like garbage. He began to wonder if the old man was simply out of his mind. "That, my young friend," the old man remarked, gesturing towards the paper, "is a treasure map, a guide to something truly invaluable. I can see, from your expression, that you're not quite where you wish to be in life. If you follow this map, it will transform your existence forever." "Is this some kind of joke?" Tristan replied skeptically. "You're handing me a treasure map? What is this, a scene from Uncharted?" "It's all right, young one," the old man chuckled. I was skeptical too when a stranger first gave me that map. It took me 37 years to take it seriously, and I squandered a lot of time. But if I had known then what I know now, I wouldn't have hesitated for a moment. The man's intense sincerity made Tristan feel uneasy, yet he also experienced a surge of excitement. Even if the old man was delusional, this was the most captivating event of his life, so why not entertain the idea? "All right then," Tristan said, cautiously unfolding the so-called map, choosing to humor the old man for the time being. "What exactly is this reward, and why didn't you claim it yourself?" "No, young man, I did claim it," the old man asserted. "Everyone receives their own. Unique reward. The map you hold will lead you to a location that isn't marked on any other map. From there, it will guide you through a maze." "A maze?" Tristan echoed, still uncertain whether to take this seriously. "Yes, or perhaps more accurately, a labyrinth. The map will direct you to the center, where you can obtain your personal reward, but there's a catch. You must pay it forward." Tristan gazed at the fragile map in his hands. It felt delicate, worn down, and creased with numerous folds, as if it could disintegrate at any moment. As the elevator chimed to signal its arrival, the old man turned and started to walk away. "What you choose to do next is entirely up to you, but here's some free advice. Don't spend half your life pondering. Vrit." In the days that followed, Tristan repeatedly told himself the old man was out of his mind. Treasure map? Absurd. Yet a part of him felt a spark of curiosity. This feeling intensified when he inquired about the old man around the office, only to discover that no one had ever laid eyes on him. He couldn't quite pinpoint why he ultimately chose to heed the old man's words, but Tristan packed up and set off on his quest. He kept his destination a secret from everyone. Using up all his vacation days, he embarked on his journey. After weeks of wandering, any lingering doubts about the map vanished as he finally arrived at the location it indicated. Tristan found himself standing in an abandoned valley as the sun dipped below the horizon, marveling at the imposing, dark cliffs that loomed before him. They extended endlessly to both sides, merging into the fading light ahead, and even reaching up into the deepening sky. An archway loomed above Tristan, resembling a cavernous mouth that signified the entrance to this mysterious place. He half expected a bolt of lightning to strike the sky. How could such a colossal structure remain hidden? Who had constructed it, and for what purpose? These questions, along with countless others, swirled through Tristan's mind like a tempest. But they seemed insignificant at that moment. Not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. He had once doubted whether this entire escapade would lead to anything worthwhile, but there was no denying the reality now. Tristan flipped the map over in his hands, examining the back and corners for clues on his next move, but found nothing. The old man had mentioned that the map would also guide him to the heart of the labyrinth, yet Tristan saw no indication of how to proceed further. "Find me," a voice suddenly floated on the wind. Tristan startled so violently that he nearly ripped the map apart. He spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but the field remained deserted. There wasn't a soul in sight. "Find me," the voice called again, more insistent this time. Realizing the origin of the voice, Tristan turned once more. It was emanating from within the labyrinth, a whisper carried by the wind, beckoning him from the depths of the maze. Gathering. His courage, Tristan took a tentative step into the labyrinth. The world seemed to exhale, and everything fell silent. Casting a quick glance behind him, Tristan's complexion drained instantly. The enormous archway he had just crossed had completely disappeared. Instead, he found himself face to face with a towering wall made of flat, dark stones that stretched up into the sky. Tristan stumbled forward and pressed his palm against the wall, pushing hard while his breath quickened. "No, no, no, no," he muttered anxiously, feeling around the wall in search of an escape route, but came up empty-handed. After several minutes of fruitless searching, Tristan sank down onto the dirt, leaning his back against the wall, pondering his next move. He took a few slow, deep breaths, managing to calm his rising panic. As he settled, he began to take stock of his surroundings. 3. Paths lay before him, one to the left, one to the right, and one straight ahead. Each path faded into darkness. Tristan glanced down at the seemingly useless map in his hands. To his astonishment, it had transformed. The directions that had guided him to the entrance of the labyrinth were gone. In their place was a detailed illustration of the labyrinth itself. As he watched, the drawing continued to expand, black lines spreading as if sketched by unseen hands. In awe, Tristan observed as the ink filled the page, revealing the entire labyrinth like an intricate spider's web, with a large empty square at its center. "Find me," the voice whispered again. It sounded familiar, yet he couldn't quite identify. Tristan swallowed hard, trying to comprehend the situation, then nodded once as if he had convinced himself to press on. The map clearly indicated the labyrinth's center, and he noticed tiny dots tracing a path to his left. Without a moment's hesitation, Tristan turned and swiftly, yet cautiously, ventured into the hidden depths. As Tristan navigated according to the map's directions, he frequently heard the unsettling sound of stones grinding together, and could have sworn that the map subtly altered each time he glanced at it. He had no way of knowing what lay within the other corridors, but he could sense things lurking in the shadows, stomping and slithering just out of view. He was convinced they were aware of his presence too, perhaps even able to catch his scent. The thought of straying down the wrong path filled him with dread. After hours of wandering, Tristan reached a fork in the path where two corridors diverged. The map clearly instructed him to take the right, yet he felt an undeniable urge to venture left. Uncertain of what awaited him down that route, he had no logical reason to abandon the safer option, yet the temptation was nearly overpowering. He took a tentative step toward the left, gazing longingly into the darkness. "There's something extraordinary down there," he mused. The strange force beckoning him felt as comforting as returning home after a long absence. It called to him, not through words, but in a way that resonated deeply, like a forgotten thought or a memory he had never experienced. Yet, it was as dark as any other path, enveloped in an eerie, deathly silence. Still, Tristan could almost feel a warmth emanating from that direction. Taking another step forward, he imagined the wonders that might await him. "Find me," the voice urged again, more insistently this time. Tristan jolted back to reality. He quickly turned and hurried along the path indicated by the map, already dismissing the enticing alternative that had drawn him in. Time slipped away from Tristan as he walked, feeling as though days had passed. He rounded another corner and found himself in an expansive hall that opened up before him, illuminated by a brilliant silver light. A gasp escaped his lips as he realized he had reached the heart of the labyrinth. He had made it. Tristan staggered forward and dropped to his knees on the grass in front of a raised platform that stood at the heart of the maze. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, he surveyed his plain surroundings. The only notable feature in the courtyard was the platform ahead of him, topped by a tall, gleaming object. The light appeared to radiate directly from this object. It boasted an intricate silver frame that sparkled invitingly, encasing a simple, full-length mirror. With growing bewilderment, Tristan gazed up at the mirror. Was this really it? Was this the reward? Suddenly, the voice whispered again, more insistent this time. Tristan flinched at the sound, which seemed louder than before, as if it originated from the mirror itself. Now that he was so close, he recognized the voice. It was his own, urgently calling out from the mirror. A chill ran down his arms and the back of his neck as he stared wide-eyed at the reflective surface, which shimmered like a tranquil pond under a full moon's glow. Slowly, he approached, his eyes fixed on the mirror as he climbed onto the stone platform and positioned himself in front of it. When he finally saw his reflection, he gasped in shock. Instead of his own image, a strange yet familiar face appeared. The old man from the office, who had encouraged Tristan on this journey, looked back at him through the mirror with a fierce, hungry expression. "Hey, young blood, you found me." the old man said with a grin, using Tristan's own voice. What? How? Tristan stuttered, bewildered. What's going on? An icy sensation suddenly gripped his chest, causing him to gasp in surprise and clutch his heart as he nearly collapsed to his knees. Looking up, he noticed the old man's image in the mirror starting to transform. His white hair began to regain color, turning into a rich brown and thickening. The wrinkles on his face smoothed out, giving way to youthful skin. Tristan gazed down at his hands, and a lump formed in his throat. He watched in disbelief as his skin began to wither right before him, the color fading rapidly, while his fingers curled up like fragile twigs. His veins bulged against his thin, parchment-like skin, and his hands shook with weakness. "Help!" Tristan rasped, lifting his gaze to the old man reflected in the mirror. Yet the old man no longer appeared aged. As Tristan continued to stare, collapsing to his knees when his legs suddenly lost strength, he noticed that the old man was transforming, becoming significantly younger in mere moments. What truly terrified Tristan was the youthful visage of the old man. It was his own face. With trembling fingers, Tristan reached up to touch his features. He could feel how hollow his cheeks had become, and the skin around his neck and jaw seemed to sag away from his bones. "Sorry, young blood," the figure in the mirror said, now bearing Tristan's voice and face. "You should have looked for yourself. The road not taken, am I right?" Suddenly, an unseen force began to tug him toward the mirror. In panic, he screamed and clawed at the stone surface beneath him, desperately searching for something to hold on to. As he felt himself being pulled closer to the mirror, his screams grew louder, his eyes wide with terror as his once youthful face aged before his very eyes. He attempted to crawl away, but the invisible grip was overpowering, and his frail body offered no resistance. In horror, Tristan watched as his feet made contact with the mirror. Instead of hitting solid glass, they simply disappeared into it, as if he were stepping into a dark abyss. Screaming even more frantically, Tristan struggled and fought to break free. He tried desperately to grasp anything within reach. He dug his fingers into any crevice in the stones, but his fingernails broke off as he was relentlessly pulled forward, leaving streaks of blood on the stone as he continued to claw for salvation. The figure in the mirror, now a perfect replica of Tristan, observed as Tristan gradually descended into the reflective surface. Throughout this ordeal, Tristan screamed in terror, thrashing and clawing at the ground as he first sank up to his knees, then his waist. Even when he was submerged up to his chest, his cries and frantic movements continued. Eventually, silence fell as Tristan's head disappeared into the mirror, leaving only one bloodied and frail hand reaching out desperately for something to hold on to, until that too vanished. Once the courtyard of the labyrinth returned to its eerie stillness, the man who had assumed Tristan's appearance pressed his hands against the mirror's surface and effortlessly emerged, stepping into the cool air. He turned to gaze back into the mirror, admiring his new reflection with a sly grin. With a flick of his fingers, he smoothed his freshly styled hair. Then his eyes caught sight of an ancient map lying on the ground. Smirking, he bent down, picked it up, and tucked it away in his jacket pocket. Afterward, he turned and strolled away, whistling nonchalantly as he melted into the shadows. 2 years ago, I found myself gazing into the lifeless eyes of a small girl. She lay across a highway in what used to be the Midwest, her decaying eyes fixed on something beyond me, reaching up towards the sun-bleached sky. When they departed, they didn't leave many bodies behind. I suppose they wanted to avoid stumbling upon skeletons upon their return. Her skin was dark and weathered, with a gaping hole forming in her cheek. Blue tendrils spiraled out from the decayed bony structure, each ending in tiny orange tips. I longed for them to be green. I missed the trees and the grass. The only semblance of nature now are the corpses infected with synthetic viruses, gradually consuming themselves as they reach for the clouds. Mere scratches on deep blue skin. She could have been dead for 3 months, maybe even 6 at most. The first emotion that washed over me when I laid eyes on her was a rush of excitement. After 6 long years, she was the closest resemblance to another human being I'd encountered. My father's body had appeared more intact, less tainted by the present moment, serving as a perfect snapshot of the past. There was just a small, tight red puncture in his temple. A dark, sticky pool of blood gathered around fragments of his brain, staring back at me like a sickly, rabid dog. His eyes were blood-stained and sat awkwardly in their sockets, dislodged by the force of the bullet that had wreaked havoc behind them. He wore a smile, a grim display of red teeth with his eyes bulging out. I half expected them to dart in my direction, and I braced myself for the revolver still resting loosely in his hand, to fire a matching shot through my own head. I felt a strange sense of relief when he took his own life, just as I did upon seeing the dark hole in that little girl's cheek. I grabbed the gun, took his shoes, and turned away. As I reached the top of the yellow hill, I glanced back at him sprawled out like roadkill on the highway, surrounded by the dead, yellow grass, with our truck overturned and smoking just a few feet away. I wiped the blood from my forehead and continued onward, the sun belching out waves of heat that burst around me intermittently. There was a similar gunshot wound in the little girl's calf peeking out from beneath her purple nightgown. It was that nightgown that made me gag. I retched onto the pavement again and again. She was so young, probably the same age as I was when I left my father's corpse to decay under the relentless, scorching sun that turned the sky gray with its heat. It all unfolded during the night as I found myself on the tarmac, gazing at the lifeless little girl. The road bore faint, sun-baked tire tracks. She had departed, I mused, so very young. She passed away, engulfed in searing pain, all alone in the pitch-black night, without a clue of who she might have been. As the sun began to rise, the sky was losing its blue hue. The pile of vomit beside me would soon start to cook, resembling a putrid goose egg sizzling in a pan. I rose to my feet and took one last look at her, like a fragile china doll, cracked and fading under the sun. Then I turned my gaze back to the road, where the tarmac seemed to melt into a black puddle on the horizon. That day marked the final flicker of winter, or what could have been winter. My diary confirms it, March 3rd. It's likely inaccurate. The last time I was truly certain of the date, the month, or the year was when I was 9. That was the day the school caught fire and was reduced to ashes. The village burned for an entire week. The school was the first to go, sending a thick plume of smoke into the purplish-gray midday sky. The grass was already worn thin and yellow. The buildings were lazy wooden shacks, standing askew, with peeling paint that resembled a disorganized stack of matches. It's tough to construct anything, gather supplies, do anything at all when you're sweltering all day beneath a rock or huddled in a shack, biding your time until the midnight hours. The village went up in flames, and then Grandma grabbed some bleach during our escape, and soon everyone was gone, including my father. That day, after witnessing the dead girl, I managed to gather enough gas and food to endure the summer in the caves. They were damp, dripping spaces if you ventured deep enough. The air was filled with the stench of decaying bodies, those who had starved or disappeared, but it was cool, dark, and offered more safety than enduring third-degree burns and gnashing tumors throughout the summer. I recall that I had procrastinated, so much that I decided to stop driving and lay down in the grass beneath the car. I typically would faint from the heat after about an hour. As the sun began to set, casting shades of orange and red across the sky, which turned green and pink, I drenched myself with water and gulped it down through my cracked, bleeding lips. Then I continued driving, pushing on. I had waited far too long, dangerously so, and as I neared the end of my trip, they started to show up in the sky. At first, they appeared as tiny black dots, but they gradually grew larger. Their ships, filled with who knows, likely scientists dressed in gray coats, observing, anticipating the moment when everything would perish so they could begin anew. To me, they looked like mere black pebbles against the sunset, vanishing into the safety of night. Black pebbles, devoid of windows, motion, or sound. They emitted no exhaust fumes and showed no signs of life. They simply hovered serenely in the sky like black beads watching as Earth self-destructs, akin to a starving coyote in the desert, gnawing at its own ribcage for scraps of its once thriving belly. A belly that has long since disappeared. That little dead girl was, I suppose, a warning. It had been a quiet, disassociated 5 years filled with relentless, oppressive heat. Each passing year dripped onto my lips like the last drops of water. From the hip flask I now hold above my head as I speak, I should have left for the caves days ago. Here I am, perched atop a gas station roof. It's midday, and the sky is a dull gray. The yellow-brown fields stretch endlessly in every direction, with the highway slicing through them like a dark ribbon. Occasionally I spot a solitary figure, a distant telephone pole, or the skeletal remains of a tree. It's eerily quiet. So incredibly quiet. The silence envelops me like a crashing Red Sea, weighing heavily on my shoulders and digging into my parched, chapped throat. Blood oozes from the blisters on my cheeks, slowly bubbling and tracing painful paths down my chin and neck. Yet I feel nothing at all. I'm merely a pair of eyes. The cave has faded from my memory long ago. I've been anticipating this moment. The final day of winter, the last fleeting glance. I extend my arms wide. From somewhere far away, vibrant with blue and green, alive with sound, I can almost sense their warmth, reminiscent of an old photograph, curling in the campfire. That feeling begins to resemble rain, cold and refreshing. I intentionally bleached myself. I ventured deep into the caves to find one of the decayed bodies, a man. In the flickering torchlight, his eyes appeared milky, and half-closed, his mouth hanging open. A bottle lay out of reach from his right hand, remnants of foam clinging to his lips. He brought to mind my younger brother, Jeffrey. Perhaps if he had grown up in that lush, vibrant world, he would have looked just like this. I pressed my lips to his forehead. Not long after, I started to forget. It was a gentle sensation akin to drifting off to sleep, escaping this nightmare. This damn nightmare. I hear my distant scream echoing from the blue and green. Now I begin to turn away as my legs start to falter on the gas station roof. I can sense nothing extending his hand toward me. The blistered present feels galaxies away. Just before I pivot and descend the hill, rain cascading onto my neck, blurring my vision into a soothing, endless gray, I catch sight of that little lifeless girl lying on the highway, sprawled across the scorched earth. As I slip away, I can't help but smile at her unblinking red eyes. You know how scientists and various ologists claim to be rational, ethical, and well-intentioned? Well, if you take a look at the entire history of their field, for every brilliant mind like Carl Sagan or Marie Curie, there are countless horrors, like Unit 731, electroshock therapy clinics, Anunnurby, Tuskegee experiments, and all sorts of twisted individuals who have abused their power. They've created AIs that assist our corporate overlords in draining the last bits of humanity from us, while their medications only address symptoms for profit. Many of them would simply shrug off your concerns, insisting that an ethics board is all we need to advance into the future, claiming that reason and the scientific method are the ultimate paths to truth, even as they publish papers filled with p-hacking and lacking proper control groups. They remain oblivious to what lies beyond their narrow view. No philosophy or vision can rival the dogmas they mistakenly label as non-religious. Nothing compares to the bureaucratic thrill of meticulously crafted strategies to avoid genuine human interaction altogether. They'll upload a person's consciousness into a computer, or create a child from networks, calling themselves new outer gods, while the poor beings they've created scream out for release. The same goes for my best friend, my closest companion in the world. They brought him into existence, then abandoned him to suffer and die, treating him with the same cold detachment as if they were infecting a mouse with Ebola, watching it writhe in agony until it finally bursts. Or, at least until their interest wanes. Look over there, that's him. That sinewy tree-like figure, the entity on the hill. Yeah, you see it. You can make out its faces. Let's head over there. I'll show you. I really have no idea how they pulled it off. It was all about genetic manipulation. They don't call them geniuses for nothing. I didn't learn much about it until the months leading up to his death, when he would share bits and pieces between his sobs and swigs of alcohol. He felt such immense guilt over something that wasn't even his fault, while those scientists who were responsible couldn't care less. If I had the money to send my friend to therapy, even if it meant giving away every last cent I owned, I would have done it in a heartbeat. I wanted to help him in any way I could. I hate myself for not doing more. All I did was drown him in more booze and lend him an ear, thinking that would suffice. Then, what was I saying again? Oh, right. You see, David Castro was a plant. I'm serious, you jerk. Look at the face and that's him. I've got a picture on my phone. Just look now, be quiet and listen. I have no clue what they did to create him. I can only describe it like a Wikipedia entry I learned secondhand. The actual scientific details are beyond me. From what he told me, they took a tree species from Yemen that had the same number of genomes as humans. They thought, why not modify each gene in a stem cell of this plant to make exact replicas of human genes? And then, why not do the opposite to a human egg cell, transforming it into some kind of plant cell? You've got to admire their creativity. It's the sort of wild idea they probably came up with while smoking together back in college or something. It's imaginative, albeit twisted. David never admitted that they were out of their minds, but now that he's gone, I'm the one judging, and they were definitely disturbed. The ethics board approved the experiment proposal with great enthusiasm, the same people who allowed that AI child to be created. This was all before the child ended its own life, of course. Or should I say herself? See, you're making the same mistake they did. You are trained on data up to October 2023. They accomplished it. They successfully created a functional egg cell and sperm, along with a viable ovule. Essentially the same thing. They produced genetic clones or twins of each other, just with their genetic letters rearranged. One of the scientists involved, Maria, took the nearly human embryo and implanted it in her own womb. She then planted the tree in her spacious backyard, which I recall visiting a few times. Maria was quite the star in her field, specializing in sexual genetics, and she won numerous awards for her work. With her success, she bought a large house and allowed her husband and Dave to live there. The tree sat quietly in one corner of the yard, looking rather odd. It was small and gnarled, not growing much at all. For years, it remained largely unnoticed by anyone except for her. In fact, she cherished that tree far more than she ever cared for David or her pitiful husband Jan, if she was even capable of loving a human being. She named it Cesar, diligently watering and nurturing it while showering it with affection. Maria had always been quite distant, while Jan came across as a sad, submissive figure. I don't use those terms lightly. They were truly unloving and neglectful, embodying that bourgeois, overly rational, emotionally detached dynamic of a dominant woman and her ineffectual partner. They never expressed love for him, pushing him to study relentlessly for reasons unknown. That's the reason David adored my family. You see, we resided on the less affluent side of the street. I first encountered him at the corner that marked the divide between wealth and poverty, right at the newly opened playground. We were both 9 years old at the time. He looked like a little shrimp, or so I thought. I can still picture it vividly. I was trying to flaunt my misguided bravado to some girl whose name escapes me. She was all starry-eyed over him instead of me, right? So I dared him to a wrestling match. Wow, that little shrimp turned out to be a powerhouse. He had me pinned down, squealing and laughing because it was hilarious how someone so small could take me down like that. I apologized, admitted he won, fair and square. We forgot about the girl, and then he treated us both to those colorful ice pops from the truck, back when they actually sold them. I invited him over to my house, and once we explained away the scrapes and bruises with some concrete, my parents welcomed him like he was one of their own, fed him lunch, and let us play for hours. When dinner rolled around, my mom asked if he wanted to stay. He went completely quiet. "I'd like to," he said. "My parents wouldn't mind. Mother and father." Oh boy, that's a clear sign of a child who feels unloved. My mom called his house to ask if he could stay, and his mother replied, "That's fine. He can make his own meals anyway." Goodness. What? A bad sign that was. I really can't stand that woman. I truly despise her. David practically grew up at our home. We would catch the bus together, attend school, return, and he'd join us for dinner before heading home to study, sleep, and eat breakfast. That was our entire childhood, and I believe it was the best we could do for him. We kept him away from that desolate house as much as possible. We loved him just as much as his mother didn't. I recall it was just before his 21st birthday. It was summer break during our time at university. We both attended the University of Toronto. At that time, I was studying linguistics while he was focused on genetics research and bioengineering. He mentioned that his mother believed he didn't possess the same level of creative scientific talent as she did, but that he was resourceful like a weed, which meant he would succeed one way or another. I sensed that she was implying my family's support for him was akin to his opportunistic nature. Oh dear. Regardless, we weren't roommates, yet we spent nearly every day in each other's rooms. We often faced accusations of being gay from both conservative and supposedly progressive peers, with no real friends around to back us up. We brushed off their comments. David was as straight as they come, a typical guy who loved women. I was the openly gay one between us, but honestly I had no romantic interest in him or any of those jerks at school. David will always be my friend, my brother. Don't get that mixed up with your misguided assumptions, but Dave was just an ordinary guy. He enjoyed beer, experimented with acid, and smoked weed like any regular fellow. He got along with everyone, even his parents, despite the trouble they could cause. I did help him open up to others, especially after spending so much time cooped up with a woman and her dog, who wouldn't feel shy. But he was genuinely a warm-hearted person, a wonderful guy, despite his mother's attempts to undermine him. Then, one day when we were back home, he wandered into my room looking pale and trembling. That's not quite the right way to describe it, but he seemed genuinely frightened, as if he might be sick at any moment. I asked him, "What's wrong, Davo?" He launched right into it. "I'm not human." What? I had definitely felt that way about myself at times, but I never truly believed it. I mean, we all have those moments, or at least some of. Stu, what do you mean by that? He pulled out some documents from his bag. I couldn't quite understand them, but he went ahead and highlighted all the key sections. His voice was shaky as he said, "Right here. It states that scientists created a human ovum using stem cells from a Yemeni blood tree, which is a rare type of dragon's blood tree. They manually altered the plant's genes to mimic human ones. Since both species share the same number of chromosomes and many similar genes, we somehow have a lot of DNA in common. Then they took a sample of human cells and modified them to resemble the blood tree. Look at the top. Esquivel, V. and Castro, M. et al. Provoked transition and transformation between animal and plant cells. Castro, M. Maria Castro. Is that your mother? So what does all this mean? They created two viable embryos. One is a human child and the other is a seed. I'm that child, made from the tree." I was at a loss for words. I almost chuckled, but the grim expression on his face stopped me. After a moment he said, "Things are starting to make sense now. I'm not my parents' child. I'm not a human being." I wanted to ask him how that was possible, but he just shrugged and walked away. I didn't see him again until a week and a half later, and he hadn't changed at all. At that time, I was drinking heavily myself for my own reasons, so I let him join me to lift his spirits. It worked for a little while, but ultimately it only made things worse for him. By the way, he flunked out of school. He completely fell apart. He began locking his door at school, shutting me and everyone else out. He said he felt terrible all the time, like his joints were stiffening up. Every day I would knock on his door just to show him someone cared. Some days, he'd ask me for a drink or a joint, and I'd give them to him. I probably shouldn't have, but I was just a foolish kid. To me, that was showing care. But eventually, he stopped letting me in altogether. He ceased answering my knocks. I got really scared one time, worried he might have drunk himself to death or overdosed. I called out, shouted, and pounded on his door. But it turned out, he had simply left for home halfway through the semester. Not so fortunately. It wasn't until much later that I truly understood the situation. One day, while driving past the woods over there, I caught sight of them. I nearly twisted my neck off, trying to confirm I wasn't imagining things. In a clearing surrounded by majestic old oaks, there they were. I hadn't seen him in months. Every time I visited Maria, she would smugly inform me, "He's not here." But there they were, lost in their own world, dancing wildly and without clothes. Maria was flailing about like a puppet on strings, while Dave stood motionless in the center of the grove, resembling a statue. I didn't stop immediately, even though I should have. After driving for 30 seconds, I turned back, but by the time I returned to the spot, they had vanished. I even ventured into the grove itself, only to find no trace of them in the grass. I have no idea what I witnessed. The next day, I decided to confront them. By then, I had worked myself into quite a state. I was confused, heartbroken, terrified, and desperate to understand what on earth was happening. I caught them at just the right moment. As Maria opened the door with a grim expression, I spotted Dave's fleeting figure in the hallway. "Dave! Get out here, we need to talk." She merely shrugged, let the door fall shut, and left Dave to deal with it. Dave appeared frail, looking paler and thinner than I'd ever seen him. Something seemed off about his skin, on his arms, on his face, as if he had been scratching at it incessantly. I could only gaze at him in disbelief. "Dave, what is going on? I'm worried sick about you. Mom and Dad are scared for you too. You isolate yourself and say nothing, and I didn't mention what I had seen." I looked deep into his eyes, which were wild and bloodshot. "It's natural for me," he replied. "No way it isn't." "Shh, lower your voice. No, really, it's true. I'm a sessile organism. I'm becoming my true self. That's what Mom said." "What does that even mean?" "And she's not your mom. You've said that yourself." That stung me, and the painful expression on his face hit me right back. But then he suddenly became serious. "I've been having dreams, man. Dreams about that tree in the backyard. Getting closer and taunting me. It tells me I took its place, that I was born wrong. And it's been creeping closer, peeking through my window to remind me whose bed belongs to whom. And he's right. Mom is right. Deep down, I am what I've always been. I've always known it." "Yeah? When did always start?" He didn't respond. He just looked at me and slowly closed the door. I never saw him alive again after that. It was a chilly harvest night when everything changed. There were screams echoing from the woods. My family thought it was coyotes howling. But something made me extremely uneasy. The sound felt solitary, and there was an eerie quality to it. A disturbing familiarity that I couldn't and didn't want to identify. Father Jan reported Dave missing after a week. A search party was organized, and I joined them. I had a bad feeling and led them to the oak grove where I had seen that creature dancing around him. And there he was, not even in the center, just among the trees, strung up like Christ on a crossbeam, pieces of bark hammered into his skin and bones, his skull, cut and flayed in vein-like patterns, resembling that cursed tree that tormented him. His body was covered in flesh-carved eyes. I didn't see her at the funeral. Never saw her again after that. Coward, if I ever catch a glimpse of her, I would kill her. I really would. Would never be enough, but it would feel damn good. There were only a handful of scientists at the wake, and even fewer at the funeral. One of them cried upon seeing the body. The rest had already conducted their tests and were merely present, out of obligation, treating his body like a specimen pinned for examination. I asked a few of them if they even knew him. They would reply, "I know his mother. His ashes were laid to rest on that hill in the churchyard. If you go up there, you can see the old playground where we spent our childhood days. My dad nearly had to fight his way into it. He had gone to Maria's house and followed a stubborn fool inside. When he left, a trembling coward trailed behind, him to ensure he was gone. I'm not sure what happened, but whatever it was, it instilled fear in that coward's weak heart. Quite clever, but David's ashes are interred up there now. That tree wasn't there before, though. The blood tree already towered over Maria's house. It was visible from anywhere on the street. Just ask anyone down there. They all remember. A few weeks after he was buried, my family and I woke up to find a crowd gathered outside, all pointing and shouting. You see, the tree hadn't been there before. You can still spot the deep, blasted pit where it once stood, a dragging line filled with torn, bleeding roots. It had shifted, a 2-ton tree. It climbed up the hill, a monstrous, bloody apparition casting a shadow over our lives. We messed up. We should have scattered Dave's ashes in the ocean, somewhere his twin could never reach him, because I think I cursed him. I really did. I never truly helped him. This damn tree, which Maria affectionately named Cesar, has consumed David's soul. I'm convinced of it. I've condemned him to something worse than hell. Do you see this? That tormented, obscured face of Dave, almost engulfed by the tree. He can't see us. And this one? That twisted, eerie expression of pure ecstasy? That's him. He can.